My parents issued an ultimatum: become my sister's unpaid nanny or face a rent hike. They had no idea I'd disappear overnight, leaving them to deal with the fallout. Just a typical 25-year-old. I worked hard, graduated college, and landed my first teaching job at an elementary school. It's not a huge paycheck, but I adore working with kids, so it feels worthwhile. Still, money's always a bit tight, especially when you're just starting out. That's why I was still living with my parents in the same suburban house I grew up in. It wasn't exactly thrilling, but it was practical. They charged me reasonable rent, as my dad put it, and I handled my own groceries. I also pitched in with chores, from mowing the lawn to fixing things around the house, and even cleared out the garage last summer when Dad injured his back. It wasn't glamorous, but it was temporary. My whole plan was to stay for a couple of years, save up, and then get my own place. Sounded simple enough, right? It was until my older sister Martha reappeared. Martha is 32, and how do I put this politely? She's never exactly been the picture of responsibility. Growing up, she was undeniably the golden child. I'm not sure if it was because she was the firstborn, or if our parents simply had a blind spot for her, but in their eyes, she could do no wrong. She dropped out of college not just once, but twice. The first time, she didn't feel inspired. The second, the professors were too demanding. She's never held a job for more than a few months. Whenever something didn't go her way, she'd quit, always spinning some excuse about how it wasn't her fault. Our parents consistently swooped in to rescue her. Behind on rent, they'd pay. Car trouble, they'd cover repairs. Speeding ticket, Mom would write the check, muttering about how the police targeted young women. Meanwhile, I was scrubbing toilets at a diner to save for college and taking out loans just to cover tuition. Martha had supposedly been living on her own for the past couple of years or so, I believed. It turned out she'd been adrift, bouncing between apartments, perpetually behind on rent, and relying on our parents to bail her out. I remained completely unaware until she suddenly appeared one day and casually dropped the bomb. She was pregnant. Look, I'm not here to judge anyone's choices, but Martha's situation was far from stable. The baby's father was a guy I've only been seeing for a couple of months, and from what I gathered, he wasn't exactly thrilled about the unexpected news. He pretty much disappeared the moment she told him. You'd think this would be Martha's turning point, right? The moment she'd finally realized she needed to get her life in order? But no. Instead, she rushed straight to Mom and Dad, who instantly shifted into fix-it mode. Within a week, they'd begun renovating the basement, transforming it into a small apartment just for her. They even installed a kitchenette. I didn't ask about the funding, but I overheard Mom mention they were dipping into their retirement savings. I tried to keep my distance, honestly feeling it wasn't my concern. If they wanted to pour money into Martha, that was their decision. Yet I could already see the inevitable. My parents have this knack for pulling everyone into Martha's messes. It's as if they believe we all need to unite and fix her problems, no matter how dire she's made them. Initially, I convinced myself it wouldn't impact me. The basement was becoming Martha's private space. I figured she'd move in, settle down, and I'd just carry on with my life. Of course, it was frustrating to watch them jump through hoops for her again, but I tried not to dwell. That mindset lasted about 2 months. Then, the small things began to accumulate. First, Mom started dropping comments about how I should spend more time with Martha, given everything she was going through. Never mind that I worked full-time and came home exhausted most evenings. Then came the subtle guilt trips. Mom would say things like, Martha has no one else to lean on right now. It's incredibly tough being pregnant and single. She'd deliver this while looking directly at me, as if I were somehow obligated to magically solve all of Martha's issues. Dad wasn't much better. He'd find ways to insert Martha into every conversation. You should be grateful for everything you have, Abby, he'd remark, passing the salt at dinner. Not everyone's as lucky as you. Lucky? I was barely making ends meet trying to build a career and save money. Meanwhile, Martha was handed a fully renovated apartment, plus endless emotional and financial backing. But things escalated further. One night when I overheard Mom and Dad talking in the living room while I was making tea in the kitchen, "She's going to need a lot of help once the baby arrives," Mom stated. "Of course," Dad replied. "We'll all pitch in." All. Mom questioned, Well, you, me, and Abby, Dad said, as if it were the most obvious thing. Almost dropped my mug. They hadn't said a word to me about this plan, yet it was crystal clear they'd already decided I'd be part of it. That's when the uneasiness truly set in. I didn't know the specifics, but I could sense they were plotting something that would drag me into Martha's chaos, whether I wanted to be there or not. That uneasy feeling intensified as Martha started visiting more frequently. She'd plop onto the couch, complaining endlessly about the hardships of pregnancy and how unfair it was that her ex had abandoned her. She'd then make pointed remarks about how lucky I was to have a steady job and no kids to worry about. I bit my tongue every single time, determined not to start an argument. Yet in the back of my mind, the question kept nagging, why does this always fall on me? By the time dinner rolled around that evening, I had a heavy premonition. I didn't know precisely what was coming, but I knew it wouldn't be good. As we all sat down for dinner, I couldn't shake the distinct feeling that something was about to unfold. You know that vibe when everyone's acting a bit too casual, like they're all in on a secret except you? That's exactly how it felt. Mom and Dad chatted about random trivialities, something about the neighbor's new fence, while Martha just scrolled on her phone, felt forced, as if they were waiting for the perfect moment to spring something on me. Dinner was spaghetti, Dad's usual choice for a family talk meal. I don't know why. It's not like spaghetti makes bad news any easier to digest. I tried to just focus on my plate and avoid overthinking. But then, halfway through the meal, Mom cleared her throat. So we've been thinking, she began, glancing at Dad. I froze. Those words never brought good news. With Martha moving back home, she's going to need some help, Mom continued, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Help with what, exactly? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Dad interjected before she could answer. Baby, of course. Martha has a lot on her plate right now, and she'll find it hard to manage everything alone. I glanced at Martha, who remained engrossed in her phone, acting as if this conversation had nothing to do with her. She didn't even bother to look up. Okay, but what does that have to do with me? I asked, slowly setting down my fork. My parents exchanged that look, clearly trying to figure out how to phrase their next line. Well, Mom began, you're already living here, and you're so wonderful with kids, being a teacher and all. We thought it made perfect sense for you to help with babysitting. Help? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Dad nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, just watch the baby while Martha gets back on her feet. It wouldn't be full-time or anything, just when you're home. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Are you?
Want me to babysit a newborn on top of working full-time? I countered. Well, you're home by 3 most days, Mom chimed in. And you're not paying market rent? Dad added, as if that were even relevant. I stared at them, trying to wrap my head around their request. They weren't just asking for a little help. They were expecting me to take on an entire second job for free.
Hey, let me...
Get this straight, I said, leaning back in my chair. You want me to come home from teaching all day and then take care of Martha's baby? Mom sighed, as if I were intentionally being difficult. It's not like that, Abby. We're all going. To pitch in all? I repeated. Yes, Dad confirmed. We're family, and family helps each other. At that moment, Martha finally looked up from her phone. Wow, Abby, she sneered. I didn't realize helping your sister was such a big deal. For you, I felt my hands clench into fists beneath the table. I desperately wanted to avoid snapping, but the sheer entitlement in her voice was infuriating. It's not about that, I countered. I have my own life, my own job. I can't just drop everything to babysit. You're being selfish, Mom retorted, her tone sharp. Martha's going through a really tough time right now. The least you can do is help her out. Why is it my responsibility to fix her choices? I shot back, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. She's 32 years old. She's not a kid anymore. Martha gave me a, "Are you serious?" Look, that's enough, Dad interjected, his voice firm. We're all in this. Together, whether you like it or not. You're living under our roof, and we expect you to contribute. Contribute, I fumed. I pay rent, I buy my own groceries, I help with chores. How is that not enough? The room fell silent, the tension thick in the air. Martha just sat there, looking smug, as if she'd already won. Well, Mom finally said, if you're not willing to help, maybe we need to rethink your living arrangement. My stomach dropped. Are you threatening to kick me out? Course not, Mom quickly clarified. But if you're not willing to contribute more, perhaps we need to discuss raising your rent. I couldn't believe my ears. I'd been doing everything right, being a model tenant, if you could even call it that. And now they were attempting to guilt-trip me into taking on responsibilities that weren't mine. You're seriously doing this? I asked, my voice trembling. You're going to punish me for not wanting to be Martha's free nanny? It's not punishment, Dad insisted. It's about being part of the family, I retorted, standing up from the table. No, it's about you two enabling Martha, just like always, and now you're trying to drag me into it? Don't talk about your sister like that, Mom snapped. I'm done, I declared, turning towards the stairs. You want to help, Martha? Fine, but leave me out of it. I stormed upstairs and slammed my bedroom door, my heart hammering in my chest. I was stunned by what had just happened. I'd always known my parents favored Martha, but this felt like an entirely new low. It felt like a power play. They wanted to keep me under their roof so they could manipulate me into doing whatever they pleased. What truly stuck with me was Martha's smug expression throughout the entire conversation. She barely uttered a word, simply sat there, scrolling. On her phone, as if none of it was her concern. And in her mind, I suppose it wasn't. Mom and Dad were already going above and beyond to accommodate her, and now they were attempting to pull me into it as well. I don't think I got more than a couple of hours of sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the conversation, wishing I'd said so many things I hadn't. By the time my alarm sounded the next morning, I was still furious, but primarily I felt trapped. I couldn't just pack up and leave. I'd considered it, finding my own place, but it wasn't that simple. I was only a few months into my teaching job and still trying to build my savings. Rent in the area was exorbitant, and I couldn't afford to live alone on my salary. For the next few days, tension hung heavy in the house. Mom and Dad were clearly angry with me, but instead of discussing it, they resorted to passive-aggressive comments. Must be nice to have so much free time after work, Mom remarked one evening as I walked through the door. Yeah, some people don't have that luxury, Dad added, without even glancing up from his newspaper. I ignored them, heading straight to my room. At this point, I had no interest in arguing. I knew anything I said would only escalate things, and I simply didn't have the energy. Martha, meanwhile, was utterly thriving. She hadn't even officially moved in yet, but she was at the house nearly every day, colonizing the living room. With her belongings and acting like she already owned the place, she'd leave her shoes by the couch, her purse on the dining table, and random shopping bags scattered everywhere as if it were perfectly normal. One night I came home to find her sprawled on the couch, eating ice cream and engrossed in some reality show. She didn't even acknowledge me. She merely glanced up, offered a half-hearted hey, and then returned to her program. I stood there for a second, waiting for something more, an apology perhaps, or even just a thank you for not exploding over the situation. Nothing. I went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and noticed half my groceries were gone. My bread. Gone, my yogurt. Gone. Even my leftovers from the night before were missing. Did you eat my food? I demanded, walking back into the living room. Martha didn't even look up. Mom said I could, she mumbled between bites of ice cream. She's not the one who paid for it, I snapped. Martha finally turned to face me, rolling her eyes. Chill out, Abby. It's just food. It's my food, I insisted, my voice rising. If you want groceries, go buy your own. Geez, you don't have to be such a drama queen, Martha scoffed, setting her bowl down on the coffee table. You're acting like I stole your car or something. I was speechless. I just stood there, fuming, while Martha grabbed her phone and started texting someone, completely ignoring me again. I wanted to scream to tell her how entitled and selfish she was, but I knew it wouldn't change a thing. Martha had spent her entire life getting away with this kind of behavior because Mom and Dad allowed it. and now they were trying to drag me into their mess. The next morning, Mom cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. "You need to apologize to your sister," she commanded, her tone stern. "For what?" I asked, genuinely bewildered. "For making her feel unwelcome," Mom said, crossing her arms. "She's going through so much right now, and the last thing she needs is you being difficult." "Are you serious?" I retorted, turning to face her. "She ate all my food and acted like it was no big deal. How is that my fault?" Mom sighed, as if I were the unreasonable one. "It's just food, Abby. You can always buy more." "That's not the point," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "The point is, she doesn't respect anyone's boundaries, and you're letting her get away with it." "Boundaries," Mom scoffed. "This is her home now, too. You need to learn how to share." In that moment, I realized there was no reasoning with her. Mom wasn't interested in hearing my side. She just wanted me to fall in line and do what she considered best for the family. Over the following week, the situation only deteriorated. Mom and Dad started dropping thinly veiled hints that they'd raise my rent if I didn't step up. Martha began moving even more of her belongings into the house, cramming furniture and boxes into the basement, even started using my bathroom. Apparently because the downstairs one wasn't good enough. I tried to maintain my distance. But it felt as if no matter what I did, they were all determined to pull me deeper into their chaos. One evening I came home to find Dad in the living room, holding what looked like a budget spreadsheet. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. I hesitated, then finally perched on the edge of the couch, steeling myself for what was coming. "We've been looking at the numbers," Dad stated, tapping the paper with his pen. "With Martha moving in, expenses are rising. I think it's only fair for you to contribute more." "You're already charging me rent," I pointed out. "Much more do you want?" Dad shrugged. "I'm still figuring that out, but if you're not willing to help with the baby, this seems like the best solution." I was aghast. They were literally using my rent as leverage to force me into babysitting. "This is ridiculous," I declared, standing up. "I'm already paying more than enough for what I get here. If you want me to leave, just say so." "No one's asking you to leave," Dad quickly retorted. "We're just asking you to do your part." "My part?" I repeated. "You mean Martha's part?" Dad opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I walked out of the room and headed straight to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. At that point, I knew I couldn't continue like this. I couldn't keep living in a house where my boundaries were disregarded and my parents saw me as nothing more than free labor. I didn't know how or when, but one thing was certain: I had to get out. That thought lingered, growing louder with every instance Martha sauntered through the house, as if she owned it, or Mom and Dad attempted to guilt-trip me into helping. But deciding to leave and actually executing the plan were two very distinct challenges. I hadn't saved much yet, certainly not enough to comfortably afford my own place, and the notion of suddenly uprooting my entire life felt overwhelming. Still, I knew staying wasn't an option. If I allowed them to pressure me into becoming Martha's substitute parent now, it would never end. They'd just keep piling more and more onto me until I was completely trapped. I refused to wake up 5 years from now, still stuck in that house, miserable and resentful. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down with my laptop. I opened my budget spreadsheet. Rent, groceries, gas, student loans. I wasn't an expert saver, but I had been setting aside a small amount each month. I tallied everything up and realized I could make a move work if I found an affordable place and tightened my belt for a while. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. A few weeks prior, my coworker Alicia had mentioned she was looking for a roommate. I hadn't given it much thought then, but now it felt like a lifeline. I texted her, "Hey, is that roommate thing still an option?" She replied, almost instantly, "Yep, still looking." "Why are you interested?" "Yeah, maybe. Can we talk after work?" Alicia's response was quick and simple. Of course, that afternoon. I stayed late at school, waiting until the halls quieted before heading to Alicia's classroom. She was at her desk, grading papers. "What's up?" she asked, looking up from her stack of essays. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Finally, I said, "I'm seriously considering moving out of my parents' place. Things are getting complicated." Alicia nodded, as if she understood without needing further explanation. The offer's still open, she confirmed. It's not huge, but it's clean, and we'd split everything down the middle. Rent's $800 a month, utilities included. That was a bit higher than I'd hoped, but definitely manageable. When would? You need someone to move in? I asked. Yesterday, she joked, then added, but seriously, any time. The room's yours. I told her I'd let her know by week's end, but internally my decision was made. This was my escape. Next, I had to strategize how to leave without sparking even more drama. If my parents caught wind of my plan too soon, I knew they'd try to sabotage it. They'd guilt-trip me, argue, or even immediately raise my rent too, prevent me from saving. So, I kept quiet. I began packing little by little, focusing on essentials, clothes, personal items, and anything I couldn't afford to replace. I stored everything in my car's trunk, concealed under a blanket in case anyone became curious. Simultaneously, I started documenting everything. I took photos of my room, my furniture, my electronics, anything that could potentially become a point of contention later. I knew from experience that Martha had a habit of conveniently forgetting who owned what, and I wasn't about to lose my belongings in the chaos of my departure. One night, while everyone was asleep, I printed a formal 30-day notice. I'd done some online research and learned that even though I wasn't technically a tenant in the legal sense, having everything in writing was smart. The last thing I wanted was for them to accuse me of abandoning them without warning. I barely slept that night, constantly checking the clock and listening for any sounds that might indicate someone was awake. Finally, at 6 a.m., I slid the envelope under my parents' bedroom door. Their reaction was immediate. By the time I got home from work that day, Mom and Dad were waiting for me in the living room. "What's this?" Dad demanded, holding up the letter as if it were a personal affront. "It's my notice," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're really doing this?" Mom asked, her voice already trembling. "Yes," I stated firmly. "I found a place, and I'll be moving out by the end of the month. You can't just leave." Mom cried. "What about Martha? What about the baby?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Martha and the baby are not my responsibility. I've done everything I can to help around here, but I can't keep living like this." "What is wrong with you?" Dad shouted, his voice rising. "You weren't stubborn like this before. We've given you so much, letting you live here, helping. You get on your feet, and this is how you repay us?" I clenched my fists, suppressing the urge to yell. "I pay rent," I said through gritted teeth. "I buy my own food. I've been responsible for myself since the day I graduated. I'm not a kid anymore, and I'm not your backup plan for Martha." Mom started to cry, which wasn't surprising. Always cried when things didn't go her way. "How can you do this to us?" she sobbed. "To your sister." I said nothing. I knew there was no point. They weren't going to listen, and I wasn't going to change my mind. The following days were among the most uncomfortable of my life. Mom and Dad barely spoke to me, save for the occasional guilt trip.
Ow.
Martha acted as if nothing had changed, continuing to take over the house as if it were already hers. One night I returned home to find she'd moved even more of her belongings into the basement. Stacking boxes atop the couch and cramming clothes into the closet, it was as if she were marking her territory, claiming every available inch of space. "Hope you don't mind," she said casually when I walked in. I didn't respond. I just headed upstairs and closed my bedroom door, trying to suppress the knot of anger tightening in my chest. In the final days leading up to my move, I intensified my preparations. I packed the last of my essentials, double-checked my budget, and finalized plans with Alicia to pick up the keys. Everything was falling into place, yet a nagging sense of unease persisted. The most challenging part arrived on the morning of my official move. I'd arranged for Alicia to swing by with her car, and we planned to load the last of my belongings before heading to her apartment. I thought I'd timed it perfectly, early enough for Martha to still be asleep, and Mom and Ma. Dad too preoccupied with their morning routines to bother me. Of course, nothing ever goes that smoothly in my family. I was halfway through carrying boxes to my car when I heard the familiar shuffle of my dad's slippers down the hallway. He appeared at the top of the stairs. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I didn't stop moving. I told you I'm leaving today, I said, grabbing another box and heading for the door. You can't just sneak out like this. He snapped, following me outside. We're a family, Abby. Are you abandoning your own family? Set the box down. In my car's trunk, and turned to face him. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said, striving to keep my voice calm. I'm choosing to live my own life. There's a difference. Dad looked as though he wanted to argue. But before he could utter another word, Mom appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed, tears already streaming down her face. You're really doing this? She asked, her voice trembling. Yes, I affirmed, holding my ground. What about Martha? She sobbed. What about the baby? Sighed, feeling the immense weight of the conversation. Mom, I've told you before, Martha and the baby are not my problem. I can't keep sacrificing my own life to fix her mistakes. That ignited her. How dare. You talk about your sister like that? She cried, her voice escalating. She's doing the best she can. Is she? I shot back. From my perspective, it looks like she's just waiting for everyone else to do the work for her at that moment. Martha emerged from the basement, looking disheveled, but fully awake. She took one look at the scene unfolding in the driveway and smirked. Don't worry, Mom, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. If Abby wants to be selfish, let her. We don't need her anyway. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to retaliate. Instead, I turned to Alicia, who had just pulled up in her car. Let's get this done, I said, tuning out the chaos behind me. Alicia gave me a sympathetic look and began helping me load the rest of my belongings into the cars. My parents continued their argument in the background, unleashing every guilt trip imaginable. Who's going to help us now? Dad shouted. Ow! Can you be so heartless? Mom wailed. Martha, meanwhile, leaned against the doorframe, observing the entire spectacle as if it were a live performance, staged purely for her entertainment. By the time we finished loading everything, I felt utterly drained, as if I'd just run a marathon. I stood in the driveway, taking one last look at the house I'd called home for so many years. It should have been a bittersweet moment, but all I felt was profound relief. With that, I started the engine and drove away, Alicia following closely behind. The relief I felt pulling into Alicia's apartment complex was instant. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, completely drama-free. Alicia helped me carry everything inside, and within an hour, I was unpacked and settled into my new room. Afterward, we sat on the couch chatting about work. It felt normal, like a brief glimpse of the life I'd been missing while trapped in my family's chaos. But that peace lasted only about 2 hours. My phone began buzzing nonstop. Calls, texts, voicemails. It was my parents, my aunts, my cousins. Apparently, Mom had already spread the news that I had abandoned the family, and everyone had an opinion. Abby, how could you do this to your sister? One voicemail from Aunt Carol began. She's pregnant and vulnerable. Don't you care about family? Selfish doesn't even begin to describe you. Another text from a cousin read. The worst part was Martha's social media posts. She'd gone full victim mode, sharing pictures of her baby bump with captions like, some people would rather run away than help their own family. At least my baby will know what real love looks like. I blocked her immediately. It was infuriating, but I refused to let it drag me back in. I reminded myself this was precisely why I'd left, to escape the manipulation and endless drama that always came with being part of my family. The following week at work, things became even stranger. My mom appeared at the school during my lunch break, crying and pleading to talk to me. She was in full meltdown mode, claiming I'd destroyed the family and that Martha was falling apart without me. My principal had to intervene and ask her to leave, which was utterly mortifying. I spent the rest of the day avoiding eye contact, knowing everyone was probably wondering what kind of family drama I was entangled in. Yet, that incident actually worked in my favor. I thought I was done with the house and all its accompanying chaos. But of course, life isn't that simple. About 2 weeks later, I realized I'd left some crucial documents behind, a file containing my teaching certification, tax forms, and other necessary papers for work. I'd been so fixated on escaping that I hadn't double-checked the small drawer where I usually kept them. After Mom's school visit, I confided in a couple of coworkers about everything that had happened. They didn't hesitate to offer their help. "Let us know when you're ready to grab the rest of your stuff," Alicia said, handing me her spare car keys. "We'll make it quick." So a few days later, Alicia and another coworker, Maria, accompanied me to my parents' house to retrieve my remaining belongings. I thought I was prepared for whatever nonsense they might try, but I underestimated just how low they were willing to stoop. When we reached my room, it was unrecognizable. Martha had moved in even more of her belongings, blending them with mine in what felt like a territorial takeover. Clothes that weren't mine were crammed into my dresser. Random baby items were piled on my desk, and my nightstand had been completely cleared out and filled with her things. I muttered, more to myself than to anyone. Else Martha appeared in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee and looking utterly unbothered. "Oh, hey," she said casually, as if nothing were amiss. I guess some of my stuff got mixed in. It's hard to tell what's yours and what's mine at this point. I stared at her, trying to comprehend her audacity. "You mean the stuff that was in my room where I've been living for years?" She shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. "Well, you already left, so what does it matter?" It was clear she'd done this deliberately, hoping to make things difficult for me. Didn't know as I'd anticipated this exact scenario. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd saved pictures of my room from before she started moving in. "I already have photos of everything," I said, holding up the screen for her to see. "And I made a list of all my stuff, right? Down to the serial numbers on my electronics." Martha's face contorted in frustration. But before she could respond, Mom and Dad showed up. "What's going on?" Dad demanded. "What are you doing in here?" he asked furiously. "I came to grab some things I forgot." "But Martha is claiming she can't tell what's hers and what's mine," I explained, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "But I have documentation for everything I own." Dad's expression darkened. "You take anything that doesn't belong to you? I'll call the police." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Go ahead," I challenged. "We can also discuss the legality of you entering my room without notice and tampering with my belongings." That silenced him. Alicia and Maria stepped in, helping me sort through the mess. Martha attempted to argue when I picked up my laptop, claiming it was hers, but all I had to do was show her the purchase receipt and a photo of the serial number. The more she realized her scheme wasn't working, the angrier she became. "This is so unfair," she shouted, throwing her hands in the air. "You're stealing from a pregnant woman?" I turned to her, finally having had enough. "The only person trying to steal anything here is you," I stated firmly. "Just like you've been trying to steal my time and my freedom by expecting me to. Be your unpaid nanny. Not anymore." And with that, I got into Alicia's car and didn't look back. That was all 6 months ago. Martha had the baby, and as I predicted, things are unraveling. My parents are now saddled with the child care responsibilities they tried to dump on me, all while balancing their full-time jobs. They're exhausted and completely overwhelmed. According to the few family members who still speak to me, Martha hasn't even attempted to find a job. She claims she's too stressed to work, which is probably true, given she spends most of her time scrolling on her phone and ignoring her responsibilities. She's still living in my parents' house, now with a crying infant and an unfinished basement renovation that continues to drain their retirement savings. I've heard they've made several attempts to contact me since I left. First, there were angry texts about how ungrateful I was. When that failed, they shifted to guilt trips about how much the baby needed me. Their latest tactic involves sending photos of my niece with captions like, "Don't you want to meet your only niece? She needs her aunt in her life." I've blocked them all on social media and set up email filters to avoid their messages. A few family members who understand my perspective have kept me informed, but I've made it clear I'm not interested in rebuilding relationships until my parents and Martha acknowledge their behavior and make genuine changes. Ironically, if they had simply respected my boundaries and asked for occasional babysitting help like normal people, I probably would have agreed. I love kids and wouldn't have minded helping out sometimes. Their attempt to trap me into full-time childcare, completely disregarding my space and autonomy, destroyed any chance of that happening. So yeah, that's my story. I realized from this entire ordeal is that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their destructive behaviors.